listening to our podcast. This is We Mortal Coils, and I am joined by none other than you, the audience, but also my lovely co-host, who I also have the pleasure of calling my friends, Stefan here and Trevor. We are up early this morning to talk about the topic of the day, which is, what is the goal of education? Ooh, that ought to get the noodles noodling, if you ask me. So, hope everybody out there is doing well. It's a new year. February 2nd, we are recording this, so we are already plowing right through 2025. But yeah, what is the goal of education? What are we doing when we go to class and sit down and listen to somebody talk for like an hour? And we get given all this work to do to prove that we know how to do it, and all of this stuff. We do this for years. In fact, almost a quarter of our lives can be taken up by simply the pursuit of education. I mean, what is an education? Why have we developed this sort of public school system? I have a lot of questions. We can talk about things like homeschooling versus public schooling. We can talk about those snotty rich kid private schools. We can talk about
we talk about religious education.
We absolutely can.
Okay.
Religious perspectives in the public school rather, is where the contention is. I've also got, what are some major differences between grade school and college? Are there some things that should be somewhere that they're not? Like, what didn't you learn in school? People are always talking about, I don't know how to file my taxes. They didn't teach us that in school. Things like that. What is the goal of education? Anyways, let me pass it around so my co-hosts can introduce
I just want to comment, quickly. So you've posed this question, right, Bray, to a person studying the human brain and mind, right? And then you've posed this question to an educator, right? So, I mean, and I don't know what Michael does. If we're all being honest, I have no idea what Michael does. And so, I hope he joins us. But we're gonna have a lot to talk about. I feel like, or nothing. Yeah, but then we wouldn't have an episode, and then we'd have to delete it. And so, if you're watching this, reader or listener rather, then we found something to talk about.
It's the lost tapes.
Yeah,
lost tapes. Very good.
But no, in all seriousness, according to fascists, it's the ability to raise a whole generation in lockstep with your ideas. I mean, that's of course what it is.
True.
And that's the way that people seem to either one believe and project that that's what it's for, to train a generation in their ideas, or they think it's like the opposite of that. And what do I mean? I mean that, as an educator, I've sworn to myself and others that I'm not trying to teach the students what to believe, right? I'm trying to teach them what to know, perhaps, but most importantly, to figure out what to know, right? That's the process. And I mean, I don't know. You ask, why do we do this so long? And the very simple answer, of course, is more complicated than this. But the shortest answer I could provide is that we're speed running it. Instead of everyone having to figure out things from the ground up, we're taking other people's mistakes and successes and then condensing them to an understandable framework. And then we're giving it to students. And then after that, we, place a societal measurement on how they're doing. And that's the grade. That's society's way of saying, hey, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and you need to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me try to come up with an answer myself. So what is the goal of education? So this is one of those things that's really tough, because I don't it really depends on, and this can be really upsetting, but it really depends on who you ask. It's like here's the thing: if you ask given parent A, what is the goal of education? It's to create a child that will be a doctor. You know, if you ask
Right.
if you ask a given theater major, what is the goal of education? It's to make me the next Brad Pitt or whatever else. It's to make me the next this. If you ask, it really is, what is the goal of education? And then, I mean, all that it really comes down to is, well, what is your goal for this thing you want to be educated for? What is your intention? And I really can't approach it from a holistic scale because I don't see it as a holistic scale. Because if you look at it from like we mentioned fascism a second ago, if you look at it from the fascist point of view, is to like create ideologues or something. Well, that kind of, as a meta, that's like, well, if you insert this person here, therefore they would answer this way. I think that's the kind of the meta here. It just depends on who you ask, and everyone's going to have variance. And I do fear that we're not going to have too much to talk about beyond that, because for me, it really is that simple. We can explore
But
myriad.
what about the so like you of all people know that there are a few ways, at least, right, that seem to be really conducive to helping people understand something.
Mm.
And then there are certainly several ways in which it's not a good idea. Like there are a few, I guess we could call them techniques or something, that really don't produce an educated person.
Mm.
And I mean, in other words, that's kind of just true, regardless of the human involved.
I see where. So if I understand correctly, so if you could say that in like a different way, because the way that I'm
Yeah, so
understanding
like
it,
let's
yes,
say that we scientifically compare, or psychologically, or whatever, compare teaching technique A and teaching technique B,
I see.
and the data suggests that B is superior to A, and not just like in an average sense, like nothing so crass, like on an individual level.
Well, is that not like is not? I feel like that's a very different thing from the overall question, because the question is like, what is the goal of education? And then this thing that you're introducing here is instead, what are the methods of education that will get you to the desired end? Like, how do you best educate? Like, that's
Right,
like sort of, it's a different
right.
meta from what is the goal
So
of the whole thing.
I guess it's predicated on what I said earlier,
Yeah.
right? That the goal is to get them to more or less educate themselves. Like teaching a student how to vet a document is nowadays so much more important than them learning, say, the periodic table, right?
Mm.
And I'm a chemistry teacher, like that must
Mm-hmm.
be a really big thing for me to say. No, it's not. I'm the adult in the situation, and I do in fact know what they need more.
You know,
You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's funny. But, it kind of reminds me of, so I have kind of an analogy, I think. So in a game of chess, right?
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I think there are two different things here. So one is, so what you're describing right now is, so you have this way of approaching it where you want to give people, so this is your goal of education, Stefan. So you want to do this. And to do this, now that you've set that out, that goal, there is now basically layouts or logical patterns to best approach the problem, just like chess, where you can actually solve chess once you get to a particular set of moves or a particular part of the game. Like, there's literally a logical thing to do next. There's nothing else to be done,
yeah.
and
That's
you
why
can.
computers always win
Yeah,
nowadays.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So that's what you have set up here. But what I think the question is, what I think is very different about it is, it's not how to solve chess. It's why play chess. It's why,
yeah.
like,
Hmm.
why do these rules? So basically, you've set up the rules of chess. The rooks do this, the bishops do that, and this is how. And now that you've decided that, you can make out this plan. But I think the actual question that Bray raises is instead, well, what rules should we have for chess? And that really, or what, why have
Or yeah,
really
and why
just
play?
why play? There's the whole
Mhm.
thing before you actually approach the table. And I think that's what we're actually getting into here. And I think that's going to be really quite difficult because it really depends on who you are and what you want.
For sure.
So,
And so,
yeah,
if I could continue real quick,
yeah, go ahead.
The idea that I'm trying to address is that the way I answer the question and the way that I carry the answer to the question into my daily life and across the arc of my entire career, and I guess what you could call education, would be teaching them, not what to think, but how to think critically. And so I think that does address this meta you're talking about. This layer above it, the question about why to play. I'm literally telling them that's up to you. I'm looking at my students saying, I literally cannot tell you why to play. I can tell you how to play. I can tell you how most society plays, in fact. But
right.
But I can't tell you why you play, and I want to help you figure that out.
Right. I kind of want to. Yeah, I'm kind of curious if we could separate our peas from our porridge here a little. What a weird phrase. But like, I think there are two different things that sound very similar, but aren't necessarily the same thing. So the first one is like what I mentioned at the start, where I was like, it really is up to each individual person to lay the pre-contrived
It is
to decide that sort of thing. It really is, and like it's up to the. Or let me rephrase. It is up to the perceiver as to what is the goal of their education. Like it's the perceiver that makes that decision. And then the other thing, the thing I'm trying to separate from it, Stefan, is when you say, is when you tell a student this is like this, you have to decide for yourself what your goal is here. I'm just going to tell you how to reach the goal, like the best way to reach it. I think those two things, like they sound very similar. Like it's the individual like deciding, and then you saying the individual ought to decide. But I think they're slightly different. Because I think what I'm saying over here is just sort of a like trying to approach like a
so like there has
this
to be...
one's like trying to approach like trying to just sort of create the grounds of the conversation, like, well, this is where I think it's welling up from. And over here is something slightly different, where it's like it's more so me telling you, it's a bit like a goading or me trying to instigate you to create that individual meaning, which I think is itself a form of goal creating, or a form of creating the confines of a way to approach the game.
No,
which
like
I think
I completely
is really
understand.
interesting, very different. It's
So
very interesting. It is.
Here's the deal, right? If first off, what you should know, and if you're a parent listening, I don't mind telling you this. If you are another teacher listening, or if you're a manager of any kind, blah 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 blah. The first, like literally one of the first things I ask a student when I first meet them, the very first time they like almost ever see me, I say, "What do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do career-wise?" And because we're social apes, 100% of them have something going on that they would like to do. Okay, but even if they give me an answer, I know some of them want to say nothing. Okay, like
right.
This pruning gray matter is a hell of a thing, right? Like they don't want to do anything.
Pruning gray matter.
Anyway, my point is that if a student came to me and I asked them, "What do you want to do?" and they said, "Well, nothing. I would like to do nothing." There is this gray, like this blurred line that you're talking about here, that I would then have to address. And the way I would address it is by telling them it's probably not good enough. Society has kind of determined that that's not good enough, and you need to know that.
I see.
So you get what I'm saying? Like, I completely get where you're coming from about how these are actually separate issues, because fundamentally they really might be. But like I said, the way I would approach that is if a student told me my goal is to do nothing, I'll tell them it's not good enough.
Yes. So first off, I think you definitely understand what I'm saying, and I'm glad to hear it. And I think here's what's happening right now that I think is really quite funny. So I think I'm sort of here's what I think you're doing. You are a teacher. You are a person who does, like, you're trying to do these things. This is how you do it. So like as we're talking, you go, well, this is how you do it. Well, this is how you do it. but I'm a pontificator. I just sit here like, well, how do you, what does this even mean? Like I said, so it's a bit like a doer versus some guy who's just sitting there thinking about it, abstracting. So I think that's sort of the juxtaposition between you and I at this moment. But to get down to it, I think as you go around like doing, I think you're going to be really quite good at what you do. And I think the things that you have described will make really good students. And I think you have the ground needed in order to make good students. I have no doubt in my mind. But I don't think we're any closer to the answering the purest point of the question: what is the goal of education? You know, I don't think we're any closer to it by talking about, well, with my Stefan notions, precontrived with my precontrived Stefan notions, this is what this is how I'm gonna approach it. But without the precontrived,
well, I'm kind of
Stefan
copping
notions,
out, if I'm being honest with you. I understand that. I'm copping out in the way that society has done that question for me. You know what I mean?
I think you're copping out because you have to cop out. Like you need to. Well, first off, you need to do like the ground is hot. You need to strike now. Like there are children to teach, all that kind of stuff. So you don't have the time. And also, I don't know if it's necessarily a great question. Like in the sense of, I don't think that it actually has an answer. It really does depend on the individual making these decisions. I just think it's interesting that when you go around telling people that, I think that that is itself sort of creating something different, creating the ground, like a goading. Like if I were to, I think it's very different between me saying like what really depends on the viewer and me going, hey, you viewer, you need to decide for yourself why you want to be educated. I think they're different things. And I think it's really interesting that we kind of instigate and create one ourselves as soon as we realize that we ourselves need to create one. And I think those were like, we ourselves are where it wells up from. And I think that's really interesting because it doesn't seem like those are the same thing. And it's just so interesting to me.
But I will tell you this, we need to let Bray
say something,
move us on, right?
Yeah.
But for now, I'm going to keep. I'm going to keep the position that what is the goal of education? In other words, another question you could ask is, what are the qualities of an educated person? And right. I would answer the question the same way. It is not someone who knows things. It is a person who knows how to ascertain information. Mm-hmm. Like elicit information, digest it, interpret it, and understand it.
Right. So part of the platform of this question, or maybe part of the motivation of this question, is because, like Trevor has been discovering, there's so many layers to it, and there are so many different ways that you can take it. And we live in a society. So whenever we encounter things like that,
we have a Trevor word right there.
Yeah, we have to make decisions, more or less, however you want to take that, as a governing body on how to deal with that. Because as much as
a Congress of chimps, we have to decide.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. As much as we might, sort of jokingly be like, well, everybody is just running around with their heads lopped off trying to figure out what they're doing, we would never actually survive as a country if we just let everybody run amok and do whatever. So we put people through an education system in order to inform them, or at least on the surface level, we can say, to inform them about the world, different subjects of knowledge and things like that, to fulfill whatever this goal is that we're talking about. There were some really good things mentioned that I think will help move us along. Stefan, one of the first things you mentioned was, from a fascist lens, training a generation and a regime's ideas. I think we can take that in a conversation and look at, well, what exactly defines something as, ideologically fascist in an educational sense? Like, how do we differentiate from a laundry list of things that are demonstrably fascist from, trying to straw man like public education and go, well, they're trying to teach my child about that darn evolution, and that just don't sit right with me. I mean, it's really kind of like whatever you decide is the status quo of particular regime. But also, Trevor mentioned some good stuff like, well, it really depends on the goals of whoever's involved. Maybe it depends on the goals of the parent. Maybe it depends on the goals of whoever is going into, say, higher education at a university and wants to be an actor or wants to be a engineer or something like that. And that's where I think we find a really interesting divide between things like public school and private school, because public school has an entire hierarchy working behind it in which, more or less, again, the people are deciding what are the goals of education. One administration might think that it's particularly important to educate people on, let's just say minority groups in the country, whereas another administration may think it is not important whatsoever. And that is reflected
It's
in public
anti-important.
education. Yeah, that's reflected in public education, whereas in private schools, these have their own more tight-knit, closed off from everyone else education
Reality.
system. They have their own goals, which some people might inversely look upon them from a public lens and go, well, that they've got their regime laundry list. They've got their bullet points of, their literal 10 bullet points of thou shalt not do this or that or whatever. And I don't like that. So I think where we can try to, make a square and stick in that part of the discussion is we are faced with having to make decisions about what is important to learn, what should people learn. We can all name a bunch of different subjects off the top of our head from grade school or any number of classes that you took in university that aren't particularly, like GER, general education requirements that everybody's taking. And talk about, how do these contribute to a goal? Or,
I kind of have a, and I'm not trying to take this a different direction. I hope it's the same direction,
sure.
and let me know if it's not. But a kind of more fundamental answer that I could provide, right, or that I've thought of, is what I mean to say. That is kind of the same answer I've already said, where it's like, okay, helping people figure out how to figure it out, right? Helping people understand what they need to know in order to acquire more information, and so on. The other goal here, and this is going to sound like a stretch, but I really don't think it is to survive. Right?
I'm so glad that you went there.
So what I mean to say is in this kind of story of our civilizations and more so the story of our species, right? Education used to be about crafting narrative to help children understand what we already know. And that is, if you walk this path and do not deviate, then every season you come to this other place, there'll be fruiting bodies that you can eat.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like elephant trails, like they never forget, where they are, and but sometimes they get disrupted, and so they have to change and adapt and blah blah. Well, we had to do the same thing. We had to eventually figure out how to put those things in the ground ourselves and make agriculture, for example. And we had to invent narrative on like how to communicate to our children. Look, we've done a whole lot of work so that you don't have to.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you just keep stacking those tiny incremental steps up, you get to where we are right now. And so I am teaching students how to survive in a digital landscape. And I mean, that sounds so out there and Matrix and whatever. Let's rephrase it. I'm helping them understand how they can get what they need in an environment that is no longer natural.
Right. I was about to ask you, would you prefer to be teaching them about the elephant tracks? Perhaps.
No. Yeah, I hate people whenever like I hate people's like whenever they think they're smart and they go, "We need to return to monkey." I'm like, "You have no idea what you just said.
Right.
You literally are uninformed about what all that means. You think that that's a really romantic, like the noble savage idea, that type of thing. It's like you need to be quiet. Like
I will say,
we used to be totally beholden to microbes.
That's totally true. I will say though, and this is kind of a completely not a kind of a completely side tangent, but I do advise that people go out into nature from time to time. Like
Oh yeah,
it,
Oh
yeah,
yes.
for
like
sure.
I highly suggest it, and this is to the viewer, and this is also to both of you, to go out backpacking from time to time. Like I mean, like because in normal camping, you like set up a camp, like a tent right next to your car, and you can leave. Like I think there's something highly romantic about going 6 days deep into the wilderness with nothing but a backpack and like a little receiver to call 911 if you need
Absolutely.
to, that sort of thing. It's an incredible experience that I think kind of helps you attune yourself to back to sort of to a different state of consciousness that I think is quite helpful. Yeah. Either way,
But I want to
Uh,
circle back just very briefly and give it
yeah.
back to Bray. What do I mean? A teacher, such as me, um, is, what is the goal of education? It's presented, to people like me. And that would be a more fundamental answer. Because it
Mm,
also addresses, I feel, what Trevor's talking about in like the question depends on time frame, geography, and the person, right? And it is trying to survive. Whatever that looks like, it's trying to survive.
right. And like I said, I'm really glad that you went there because that is sort of the ultimate underlying layer, beneath all of this is
you,
sur- survival. And we may not be as close to that bottom layer anymore. We may be focused on other things, just like say when somebody is no longer worried about survival, maybe they can then begin to focus more on art, and they're now completely fascinated with how they can chisel this block of marble into the human figure. But that has absolutely nothing to do with your base level of survival. It's not going to feed you, it's not going to clothe you, it's not going to help you file your taxes,
you
but
know,
it is an aspect of
mm,
the human condition that is incredibly important to us. Um,
I wanted to characterize survival a little bit more, other than
sure.
just survival for you. I
Uh-huh.
think it's actually a little bit more broad than that, or a little bit
I
more
think so.
detached from the individual sometimes. Because I think now, here and now, where we are, for us three, it's absolutely valid to say that everything we do, in terms of, or most of what we do, can be seen as um, helping in a sense with survival. Like I can attribute everything to survival to some extent. Like if I give you an education of chemistry, that gives you the holistic understanding you need in order to encounter reality at a higher level, be able to encounter more and deal with more than just like the strange notions of whatever it is you would have come up with otherwise. So that's on an individual level. But I do think it's worth noting that survival can be broadened to other things, such as like collective survival, that sort of thing. And I think that that's slightly different. It's within the same lens. I think you're still correct, but I think if we were to go a little bit further beyond us and instead go to I don't know, insert
Societal survival. I love that.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
societal survival is also another way that people encounter this, because
We,
you could
we have
receive an
to
education.
we have to foster survival of a society because we
Well,
can't exist without one.
I mean to bring this up almost sometimes in a negative way to the individual. That's where I want to stretch this to show that sometimes collective survival is in fact counter to individual survival. So you can create
Sometimes it
and
is.
instill an education of collective survival into somebody, which will lead to them believing that the only way to assist in the survival, the bold lettered survival, is to do a suicide bombing and to insert place over there. Well, that's very
Hmm.
counter to individual survival. But if you have this notion of collective survival, or just survival of your ideological framework, or of your group, whatever it is you want to call it, I think that that's another way that you can look at education. I think all of it's survival, but sometimes you can vary as to what exactly you want to survive. It could be you. It could also be something bigger than you. At least you think
To
so.
Mm-hmm.
to kind of couch it in the language of like evolutionary biology or like epigenetics or something like that, you could very much say, at least from my point of view, certainly, that people who, you know, do these acts of collective survival for, at the cost of their individual, first off, that happens all the time, right? But the exact situation of a suicide bomber, that is what I would call a misfiring of that particular like kind of pathway of understanding, or even that neural pathway. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like this person has been given this narrative, this information that the best way to benefit everyone is to die, and that's probably not true. I mean, I say probably because there's almost no situation you can think of where that would just be immediately beneficial.
Oh, I
Right.
disagree. I can think of a few.
Well, no, that's what I'm trying to say. Like,
Yeah.
99 out of 100 situations do not require someone to die in order.
Well, I disagree even more with. I think I'm much
I don't see
less.
how you could.
I'm
We're
much more
social animals.
fatalistic.
We have to have each other.
We do have to have each other, but I mean to say that life is quite a bloody thing. Like I'm not a pessimist in any sense of the word. In fact, I really believe in people, and I think people are beautiful. But I do think it's important to characterize the bloody nature of reality. So let me add like a couple of things as a way to like a couple pieces of evidence to show that sometimes I suppose you could call it ritual suicide in a sense can in fact be beneficial to a particular social cohesion, a particular way of thinking. Now, you might say that these ways of thinking are inherently negative and we shouldn't have these ways of thinking, but that's another area to explore. So, for example, martyrdom. I do want to say that martyrdom is really quite a potent thing to do for a particular way of thinking. So, I'll give you two examples. First one is the Roman Empire. That's the first one I'll give. Oh no, my camera's doing a thing. Anyway, the first one's the Roman Empire, and the second one is early Christians. So in the Roman Empire, during like the very earliest times of the Roman Empire expanding out of Italy, they would do these battles. Actually, this is still inside of Italy. Battles with local other Italians, where they believed that if the general killed himself in ritual suicide by going to the front of the battle, that would basically make the battle forfeit, where the Romans would win no matter what, and that would create a situation where the Romans would just completely defeat their enemies that day, where they like, oh my God, the general was just killed. We can't lose. And then they'd have this huge zeitgeist and then thrust over and defeat their enemies. I think that's a really good example of a certain kind of martyrdom that is, in fact, highly effective at creating a feeling of societal cohesion and societal power and
I would
dominance.
compare that to negative reinforcement.
And it definitely works, doesn't it?
Well, so that's what I'm trying to say. Like, just very briefly,
please.
And especially for our viewers out there, in case you've never heard it this way, negative reinforcement is very neat. It's very cool. It can get shit done right now. You know what I mean? And oftentimes, like a battle, like Trevor's talking about, that's kind of what's at stake. But if you're just a little more patient, and I do mean just a little, positive reinforcement works better every time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
in this particular, well, can you think of an exact example in this instance where the Romans were fighting against their enemies, where you could think of a different?
Yeah, they could have focused like they did later on about
they could have
like
locked in.
like what I mean, no. What I mean to say is like later
you.
on in that same empire. I mean, these are years and years apart. But you and I know, Trevor, that like later on, they were the reason why they were so efficient at what they did is because they actually bothered to clothe their soldiers. You know what I mean? Like, and they were obsessed about like having them good shoes and whatnot. They made their soldiers not necessarily like happy people. I'm not going to sit here and say that like a Roman is looking at the Gauls coming over the walls like they've treated me right. I think I'm going to get. No, what I'm trying to say is that if you're a little more patient and you do what I'm comparing to like positive reinforcement, you get the same results. It just takes a little more time.
So I think that's
and it's more effective because it's gradual.
Let me
change.
pull us back.
Well, I do have to disagree for just a moment, because I think what we're doing right now is we're comparing two different solutions to a problem here.
I know, so it's an analogy.
Both encountering a problem.
That's what I say.
Well, no, I think this kind of is important though. So I think you and I are both facing a problem. We're both looking at the enemy army through this Roman unit, and then I say this is a solution, and you say, well, this is a better solution. But at the end of the day, my argument is not that there are not better solutions. I would argue that there's always a better solution. There's a better solution than shoes, out there. But what I mean to say is that my solution is in fact a solution. And just really briefly, I then want to mention the thing about the early Christians.
Is it a
early
solution?
Christians?
You're down a general thereafter. I mean, it's like playing chess
Yes,
without
it
a king
is, because
piece.
you defeated your enemies. They won several
But what
battles
about
this way.
tomorrow's enemies?
Well, I think what he's
And
saying.
then we're down a general.
Yeah. So
well,
look,
listen,
what,
everything has its juxtapositions. Like everything has negatives. Every solution introduces problems.
What I'm trying to say is that if you want to make long-standing change, you have to teach people how to, like I keep saying, survive.
Well, sure, but I'm saying that this is in fact another means of doing it. And I think that
it's not. It requires death. That's the end of the game.
He's saying
for the individual, but for societal cohesion, societal survival, it is quite useful. And I just showed you that example. And the other one would be the early Christians, where like they would martyr themselves. And now to this day, Christians talk about the early martyrs as an example of faith, and like they are the executors of faith. And Islam does the same thing with their earliest people, like the Knights of Faith, the very earliest Muslims that followed Muhammad and all that sort of thing. They do the exact same thing, and those people martyred themselves too. And when they talk about it to this day, everyone talks about it to this day. I would say that is a example of extreme societal cohesion caused by personal suffering and sacrifice. I mean, Jesus Christ is a sign of that.
And I would say it's a misfiring of your genetic profile. I mean, I would say that like it's a misfiring of the same things that made someone sacrifice themselves in the face of a lion or a tiger or a bear.
Well, to say that it misfired
his fellow humans. That's what I would categorize it as.
All right, let's get back to
I disagree.
The goal of education from ritual suicide on the battlefield in the Roman times. I won't say that it wasn't a useful discussion, because I think part of what came out of that was Trevor's talking about a solution to a problem, and Stefan, you obviously disagree that it was perhaps particularly a solution. The way I looked at it is kind of like how Trevor was talking, or one of you was talking earlier about a chessboard, and it's like you can absolutely win the game of chess by sacrificing your queen in order to make a move that will win you the game. However, say you had to pick up another game immediately afterward with your remaining pieces
you have right now.
You may be at a disadvantage. But then we're just we're picking apart analogies at that point, and that's not the goal of the discussion. The goal of the discussion is to talk about the goal of education. And so I want to move to the next piece here as we cross our almost 40-minute mark. We've talked about a little bit of stuff so far. So how do we as people decide what contributes to survival? And I'm looking at this from a lens for where perhaps some of those, for example, Christians, I'm just picking on them because it's a large group.
And it's easy.
Look at what we decide for say public education, because most people are going to be put through public education in the country, so we're going from that lens. How do we decide what to include in that? How do we decide what contributes to our learning about survival, or our learning about where we are, boxes and boxes on top of survival?
Can I tell you one thing? Like earlier I said, we've seemed to have figured out some things that work and some things that don't.
Sure.
And not to stir the shit pot, but if I want my students to pass the AP exam at the end of the year, I'm not going to kill myself about it.
Okay, so in Trevor's defense here, or really not Trevor, because he wouldn't probably take this position, but I'm just saying from his analogous perspective, you may have a situation where you have a parent who wants the creation of man taught, either alongside
creationism in general, whether it be Christian, Muslim, whatever, Hindi, whatever the creation.
Yeah, any particular alternative to what the scientific.
Yes, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, Trevor, go ahead. I mean, you know where I'm going with this. It's just basically like, from that perspective, they may say, well, this is also a solution.
All right, I really want to go at this for a moment, because I think it's really quite interesting.
Go at it.
So okay. So I think I've brought this up once, like I think at least 20 episodes ago, but I think it's a really interesting way of approaching this problem.
Wait, go find what he said.
20 episodes ago.
20 or so. I think I've brought it up at least once before early. Okay. So There used to be this what's it called, Republic of Letters that had existed that eventually led to science as we know it today. Like during the 1600s, 1700s, academics would send each other letters trying to prove
Yeah.
articles of science, and eventually that would become scientific articles and
You
so
talking
on and
about a
so
lot of the
forth.
ones that had to like hide in their countries and they would like pass letters,
Yeah, trying to
get,
prove
yeah,
like certain axioms within like Euclidean geometry or something
right,
modern
right.
day, or trying to prove Boyle's law, that sort of thing, and create what we now call science. So there used to be this arguing between, not between Newton and Leibniz, because Newton never argued with anyone. He was far too smart and above everyone else to do that, as far as I can remember. Like he never wrote letters as arguments. He was far too smart, and he actually was. Like he was very full of himself, and he was also very, very smart. So, but there used to be this argument, and this is where I'm actually going. There used to be this argument between Newton's followers and Leibniz, or Leibniz followers, over exactly how to best approach positions in space whenever you align and create, whenever you do, like, let's say, physics or anything like that. So, according to Newton, this basic notion, where you can kind of think of it as what's it called? Something space, like XYZ plane space, where there's like this point
Cartesian
in space.
space.
Oh, thank you so much. I need on the tip of my tongue. Cartesian space, where you have like this right here on this part of the grid, and you have this over here in this part of the grid. And you can kind of get an idea as to where this piece right here is going based on its points along that grid. And you can kind of think of it, everything is inside of this space, this giant volume. And like and there's this one little point in space. That's like the Newtonian way of looking at it, where you see like points in space. And this is exactly where it is. According to this point grid, this is where it is. And you can look at that one point and understand where it is just based upon where it is inside of the grid. You don't need anything else. Well, the other side of it, on the other side of the channel, you have arguments happening with Leibniz's followers. And they would argue in their letters, no, it's not like that at all. It's relative positions in space. You know that the Earth is moving like this based on its trajectory in relationship to everything around it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to know. Everything else is like the Cartesian grid is sort of a category error, or something that we create in order to understand it. But if you actually want to be able to measure anything in the actual world, you have to compare it to the relative position of everything else. For example,
and its
like
relationships to everything else.
Yeah, for example, like I don't know, like the only reason I know that this is about to fall to its trajectory right here is because there's everything else around it that's staying still, to which I can then draw that counter position. Like I need an anchor from which to approach it. Now, why did I bring all that up? I bring all that up to say that ideas such as creationism, that sort of thing, are relatively less good. Like not relative in the sense like only slightly less good. I mean like they're immensely less good, but like less good only relative to the evolutionary biology point of view. But they aren't blankly, they're not just blankly bad. That's what I'm trying to say. I think it's something that is relative to other things, because they can't just be blank bad. That's not how it works. You have a position here, and because of this position, this one's bad. It's a bit like what's his name? Thomas Jefferson was a deist way back when, before like we understood evolution, that sort of thing. It was the best thing you could be at that time period. Like literally, like we didn't know where eyes came from, or like that sort of thing. We had no evolutionary perspective, so it's perfectly understandable that he would be a deist. It's relative positions.
Yeah,
And
Darwin wouldn't talk about the eye for another 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. So his way of encountering reality, like he kind of had to be a deist. Like how else did this universe start? These immaculately complex beings, humans that exist around us. Anyway, so I'm basically, what I'm trying to argue now is that creationism is only bad in juxtaposition to evolutionary biology, and you can't rag on it in the sense that it is just flat bad. Well, here's what it is. Creationism is actually better than ideologies I can come up with right now. Much better. For example, I can come up with a philosophy that the entire universe was instantly created last night, and I just woke up. And that is a far worse way of encountering reality than the belief that the universe was created 6 billion years ago by an all-knowing God, like a sort of deistic Theodore Roosevelt or Theodore just, you know.
The idea I want to say right now, while the idea is on the table, is that you have no choice but to agree with Trevor. I mean, these narratives that have kept, things moving in the same direction for the last several thousand years. I mean, that's why they have power. It's this illusion of continuity that allows them to have this kind of force in society. And so, anyway, my point is that, and my point has always been that those religions that we talk about, or creationism, blah blah blah, they were a better paradigm than yesteryear. Okay, they were. Of course they were. It's just that we have to grow up and realize that there is another way of thinking that does perform better. And by the way, I've even said it 20 episodes ago as well on False Bible Claim. Excuse me. No, I'm just joking. But,
I said this.
No,
I said this. Yes, episode 1. Yeah.
No, I'm joking. Really, like I have said this on the podcast before, just like Trevor, that there will be another paradigm. It's not a question of if, but when. Right? There will be another paradigm that kind of replaces science. Okay, and it's coming. It's probably not here. It takes a long time for such things to occur.
Well, it's yes,
and
right.
even longer for them to be accepted.
You're absolutely right.
So let me bring it back to the question at hand.
Please.
All right. So a parent is trying to get me to talk about creationism, right? The societal answer we've kind of settled up on over here in the United States is that I tell the parent, from me, they must receive scientific fact. From me, they must receive scientific truth. From you, they can receive whatever you want. That's kind of where we settled up on. At this point.
That's pretty much exactly where I was going to go next. If we decide that in the public sphere that the best option, or rather the option or solution that we want to go with, is that we will try and teach children the best available information or the best available explanations at our given time for any particular subject.
It really is the natural selection of ideas going on.
What is the opinion about homeschooling versus public schooling? There's sort of a push and a pull here, because not everyone who disagrees with a public school system homeschools their children. There are many people who homeschool their children that do disagree with the public school system. Not all of them. Maybe they just have a preference, or it's more convenient somehow for them to homeschool their children. In my opinion, not that I think this is a particularly bold opinion, and we may have even mentioned this before, but I don't think most people are qualified to teach their own children at home.
Can I say something that will help Trevor make his argument?
Do tell.
So, y'all forgive me. I really don't like the idea of homeschool. I really don't. You don't get enough socialization. You don't get enough information, etc., etc. And I don't trust the majority of people to homeschool their kids and their young adults. All right, but I would trust myself. You know what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying? Now look,
right.
At the same time, I'm not an idiot. Okay, I am qualified to teach people, that's what I've done with my life so far. But at the same time, I know I'm making Trevor's next point. I know I'm making Trevor's argument that I would not trust. And by the way, I would trust others to help me educate. That's the point of public education.
Right.
I am not good enough at certain things at the college level to help students.
Right. So I would make 2 points here, just two. First one is comes back to our very, very, very initial question of today. It's what is the goal of education?
I'm afraid so.
So when you guys talk about I don't trust homeschool for insert these reasons because it doesn't fit my goal for education. Well, that kind of is an issue because, a parent's goal for the education could be different. So, I mean, if you want to talk about if you both have the same goal, which very often I'm sure you would have the same goal for education, as insert parent here that wants to homeschool their kid, you could make an argument to that particular parent that actually you should do this public school for insert A, B, and C in relationship to your goal. But there are going to be cases where someone is a very, very, very devout Catholic and they absolutely do not want inserts 7 things that a public school teaches being taught to their kid, and they don't want their kid around other like non-Catholics. I don't know, that sort of thing. So
as opposed to the 7 deadly sins, my goodness.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's my first point, that the relative position of your goal of the education is in fact a deciding factor over all of this as to whether or not homeschooling is good, because quite literally homeschool could be the very best thing you could possibly want for some goals of education. For some, it just depends on what your goal is.
Then the question logically becomes: should parents be able to dictate the quality of their children's education?
Well,
that
actually,
that has to be the next question.
That's my second point, and that actually goes directly. You were preempting me. That's exactly where I was gonna go, because I think the next part that we have to go to. I'm going to quote a name of a particular episode of Star Trek. Who watches the Watchers? So what do I mean by that? I mean that in Germany in the 20th century, there were changes made to the public schools that I think you, myself, viewer Bray, that would not be comfortable with. And I think there will be times in our civilization, in any state, where uncomfortable things will go awry with the public with the public group, and it'll be very important with the public sphere. Thank you. It'll become very important at those moments for homeschool to always be available. In the same way with the Second Amendment, personally, I think these tools need to be available for whenever that sort of ugly face rears itself. Eventually, you will need to bear witness to these sorts of changes in the public sphere that you need to be ready for. And one of the ways you can be ready for it is via homeschool and be able to separate yourself either to a private school or to a private life where you can properly prepare yourself. Like, I'm reminded of, I used to quote the book more often than I do now, and I think that's probably for the best. But 1984, there's that point where the children quite literally hate their parents, and they go and they accuse their parents, and parents die all the time. And in Airstrip 1, they call Britain Airstrip 1, because it's like the frontier between like this empire and that one, and like it's where all the planes fly off from. And there were a lot of like children that were basically radicalized by the politics of the party at their schools, and they'd be told to go home and watch their parents and report any strange behavior from their parents. Any like remorse or this or that, and like parents died all the time.
Truly god awful thought experiment there.
Yeah. Like I mean,
that has really happened on this planet.
I'm telling you, like, go to Cambodia today, and you will see the remnants of that memory. That did happen. It did happen, and it happened in Cambodia. And the Khmer Rouge did exactly that. And we have to be very aware of the fact that our assumption right now in this age is, well, our assumption in the early 21st century, well, I think it's still more or less broadly true now, is that the public sphere is this solid thing. Well, I say that right now and it doesn't feel right, but like the public sphere is this solid thing, and we can talk about our moral values need to be enforced, being this thing in public school. People need to go to public school, but I think we should be broadly aware of the fact that the state itself does not itself have a watcher, or it's very difficult for it to.
We're supposed to be the watcher.
We're supposed to be the watcher.
What about when that fails?
Yeah, that's my exact point.
Like, what about people getting elected by buying votes?
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's myriad things that can go wrong. There are a lot of ways that cookie can crumble. I mean to bring all of this up to say that you should fight hard for your individuality and your independence, and the independence of you and yours. And by that, I mean your children and your property and your family. You need to be able to defend yourself on an individual basis from the state, and you really should dissolve from yourself the need for the collective survival, if it comes at a cost of your mind or body of your loved ones. And I think homeschooling is one way that you can preempt and protect yourself from that. So I'm pro homeschool in that sense. Yeah, I
It's like,
personally, in this day and age, wouldn't send if I had kids, I wouldn't send them to homeschool. I wouldn't homeschool my kids. I would send them to a public school. I think they'd be more ready for life, more socially developed. I think
mm-hmm.
I'm not very good at insert forms of mathematics. I'm not good at this, that. They would be much better suited to be taught by someone that's better for that. But at the same time,
Right.
I do think the lever needs to always be there, and it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be. And if it ever goes away, it means that something wrong is happening right now. And when you be ready for it and be prepared, that sort of thing.
You say that, but
it,
some civilized countries don't allow you to homeschool your children
Well, those
because
civilized
they have freedom
countries,
from
yes.
religion.
Well, those countries are very on a much closer to the knife's edge, is what I would say. Because eventually a populist, a polyucrat, or whatever you want to call, will come into power and will do something.
And
they
switch
will
the
have
levers.
less means to prepare themselves. Like, it's a bit like balance of powers, like our executive versus the legislative versus like the judicial. Like it's all well and good. Like Aristotle used to speak about this, I believe, where he talked about like the best and worst forms of a state. He argued like the best form of a state was essentially a perfect kingdom, or like a king, a goodly king, like a Marcus Aurelius or whatever you want to say, was in control. Well, the worst type of king form of government, according to Aristotle, was a tyranny led by a tyrant.
Yeah,
it was a despot. So it basically the exact same form of government, going from Marcus Aurelius to Commodus, just like what we saw in actual history. And at the end of the day, he ended up arguing that what you really want is the most stable thing. The most stable thing is dead in the center, because like the least bad of all the forms of state as it can go is this like democracy, because at its worst it's like this, like Athenian democracy and the mistakes and all that, and at its best it's like milk white. It's not even that great. It's not even that bad because of all the controls. But like the other forms of government could be so much worse. The capabilities are so much worse. Like the possibilities for Mao or Stalin to come into the fold, or a Hitler, and just completely throw everything under the bus. Completely possible. And basically, to wrap all this back into it, I think homeschooling is itself important.
I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying that reminded me of a quote from the Mandalorian TV series. They go visit this Imperial base, and it's the one where Bill, what is it, Bill Burr or Bill Barr? Yeah, Bill Burr. He's in the thing, and he's sitting down there in disguise as an Imperial troop or whatever, and he's talking to an officer, and he's going on about this operation that they did where they killed a bunch of people, and like I think Bill Burr's character was like friends with or something, and he's like, you see, boys, everybody thinks they want freedom, but what they really want is order. And I'm just thinking about that the whole time. We're talking about the concepts of the state, but aside from that, I want to take a little, the bit of time that we have left. What interests me about all of this, and sort of part of why I posed the question, is because number one, I knew we would have some very good opinions on it, but I look at sort of what we established as the fundamental ground level, like survival, and I see this as almost like you can look at it from the ground up or from the top down. Like this is a big umbrella.
Right. That is one of the problems behind it, right? It's such a big umbrella that it starts to lose meaning. And I get it. But go ahead.
And it encapsulates everything. And so when, as a society, sort of like you had mentioned very quickly earlier, Stefan, we are a societal species in part because it has been beneficial for us to do so. We have a much better time working together as a group to survive than we do everybody going out and making their own little hut. It may work for some people, but you may have somebody who's born with a particular disability, or you may have somebody who's just not apt at you could have a bunch of people who are small people who are trying to survive in an environment that is not fit for them. There could be any number of reasons, and so we work together in a society to help foster our each other's survival. But now we have sort of a balance that we like to keep, when we like to allow people certain freedoms to participate in the society so that we don't feel constrained by our society. And in part, that is reflected in sort of how we've talked about the dynamic between the state and the home, like the state and the family, where you can send your children off to go and learn what the state believes is the best way or the best information for your child to survive in the modern world. But when they come home, you can tell them whatever you want, and that may be contrary to what is or isn't actually the best available information at the time. And then at the end of the day, all of these people have to come together and operate more or less the society. And it's
Well, I would like to invoke, like, because Trevor just gave us a steel argument. You know what I mean? Like, I actually don't think you should outlaw homeschool education, but I do think it should be discouraged. Okay,
right.
like,
No, and so just real quick
but
on this,
yeah,
because
yeah.
this is the one thing I meant to say was that, and this is a little bit of a side point, but as somebody who is a leftist and is very much invested in perhaps a future and where America turns to a more collective form of government, I absolutely support every individual's right to perhaps, to use your word, steel man their own household, in the sense, like, do not the collective force of the people should be the first line of defense in a society, and then if that begins to deteriorate, then
Then the
the
individual.
individuals should be able to stand on their own. uh, but absolutely, I think it is in everybody's benefit to be more collective and help foster everyone's growth, not just exalted individuals within
Mhm.
society.
I
But
want
yeah.
to just make sure that the viewer hears this point of view, right? So it sounds like I'm making an argument from authority, right? It sounds like I'm saying, okay, as a society, we have determined X, Y, Z. All right, and maybe that is an argument from authority. Maybe it is prone to fallacy, etc., etc. But let me explain why I think it's not an argument from just authority. All right. I would like to talk briefly about, and I feel like I always get this wrong, but I believe it's called the anthropic principle, wherein you talk about the natural selection of genes, of species, of ideas, whatever kind of thing you have there. Um, we've talked a lot in this episode about the competition of ideas, the free competition of strategies, so to speak, or and not just strategies in the way that I was talking about earlier, but strategies in the way that Trevor was talking about, where it's like, no, we really feel like creationism is part of our world and we need to continue it, and so on. I would label that as a strategy in the grand scheme of things. My point is that I want you to think about early mankind, um, societally anyway, not in terms of evolution. Whenever we're on the cusp of Mesopotamia, right, where our first civilizations are just coming about, or over on the other side of the world where the what we call the Native Americans were over here building theirs and so on, too often overlooked. And so, on this planet, the anthropic principle is suggesting this. Okay, probably so many proto civilizations died out for one reason or other. Okay, so like civilizations like Mesopotamia survived in a new and encroaching paradigm of agriculture, or whatever, and it is a strategy that allowed them to survive. And if you just keep doing that, it's like you have a sift, right? Where like the big clumps of stuff get left behind and the little ones, go through. In this case, it's going through many sieves, and now we have what we have today. And what I'm ultimately trying to say is that as a society, we have determined that I should be teaching scientific fact in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
But also, as a society, we have determined, at least in this backward hellhole, that the Ten Commandments belong in the classroom, even though we as a greater society have decided that that's not true. The Constitution very plainly doesn't allow that.
Right.
And anyone who says otherwise, who has gone to lie school, is lying. Okay? That's it. I'm tired of pretending otherwise. And so what I'm trying to say is I really don't view it as an argument from authority to kind of counter what Trevor said this episode. I view it as the anthropic principle at work, wherein a lot of ideas have been left behind because they did not survive. I'm not saying, and by the way, that doesn't mean that none of them could have survived. That's something very important to remember. It just means that they didn't. All right? So we're moving towards a more secular environment, the world across. And I view that as a very positive thing. And that's all I mean to say is that societies around the world have started deciding, okay, we can't allow these like thoughts to intrude on students. It doesn't contribute to their survival. That's ultimately what I'm trying to say.
So, Trevor, do you have something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to mention there's this one neuroscientist from either UC Irvine or UC, not Santa Cruz, but his name's Donald Hoffman. He has this really interesting research where he tries to argue that the way that we encounter reality, like the way that we understand reality and have this ego and that sort of thing, like our consciousness, is this thing that's like selected for. Like it's just the best way to approach reality, but that doesn't mean we're actually viewing reality like in a correct sense of the term. Like basically his whole point is that the human body is under no strict, it's not strictly necessary for the human body to produce logical reasoning or to actually encounter reality as it actually is. It's just to best survive and repopulate and that sort of thing. And he has this whole argument that he gives that I'm not perfectly convinced by, but I think is really interesting, where he essentially says that the human brain exists in order to do this, which is survive, but not necessarily that, which is to see things how they actually are, or to actually see reality as it unfolds. And that might be one reason why it's very difficult to understand something like quantum physics. Very difficult for
because it's non-intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. And basically he creates this very complex argument that I've yet to fully encounter, where he essentially says like you're not actually made for understanding things. You're made for intuiting and engaging on this on the plains in Africa and the Horn of Africa and all that sort of thing. And those are two clean cut things, and we're attempting essentially to do the former now, or to do, I should say, like to do the next thing, which is to encounter logical reality and encounter reality as it is. But it's quite cumbersome and difficult to do, and we're now finding ourselves in strange predicaments, like certain very small scientific experiments, like looking at very small things like quantum physics, where you can see like a particle will actually be affected by something that happens in the future, like some sort of backward traveling experiments where they have actually proven that this particle will be affected by what happens after the particle. So if you do like two blips of this particle, like light shining on this particle, the first particle is actually slightly affected by the second one, even though the second one hasn't been fired yet. Like this strange temporal reality thing that kind of makes you question all of your understanding of the universe. And basically it shatters intuitions. And it kind of goes to show that your intuitions of reality can in fact break. And it speaks to the limitations of the human mind, the limitations of the brain. And it goes to show that you're not really made for understanding reality. You are made for promulgating. And that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm. And so like Richard Feynman talks a bit about this, right? When he was alive. And so everything you said is true. And I think it applies I think it applies only to the human understanding we lay on top of things. All right. In other words, we really are getting a closer look at how the world works. I think anyone who's wearing clothes right now can attest to that. We are probably understanding the world to a better degree. And so my point is that, Richard Feynman said it this way, that he couldn't stand people who thought that, like, just because they knew the word for something, they understood it. Yeah. I mean, nothing could be farther from the truth. Just because you understand, like, to the nth degree what the word, proton means or electron say, that has no bearing on what the electron is actually doing. and what its behavior actually is.
Yeah. I think
You
there's
have to
this.
build that in your brain, and no one else can
Yes.
touch that but you. And that's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I think one of the things that we have really quite a lot of difficulty with here, like in life, is we sometimes create, like when we create scaffolding to encounter our reality, like I create this idea called Stefan, and I encounter you in this way, and I have these ideas about you. And essentially that's as far as I can create a lattice work around what I see. And it's that lattice work that I engage with, that Trevor engages with. Like for example, it's a bit like, here's the universe all around us, and between the universe and myself, there is a bed sheet, which is my understanding of the universe. This is something I go into quite a lot whenever I speak to like students in my class, for example, that I taught, my philosophy class, like Wednesday evenings. So essentially, like what I'm trying to do now is separate between ontological reality, which is reality as it is regardless of your presence, and epistemic reality, which is your knowledge of reality. And the issue is you have an epistemic sheet over your entire body, and wherever it is you go, whatever it is you touch and feel, what you're actually encountering is your knowledge of reality that you're folding and folding and folding like steel over and over again. But you'll never actually go beyond the epistemic knowledge of reality. You can only engage with your own ideas that develop and get bent and shaped by the exterior world. But you still only can see, like I could almost see it in my mind's eye of the gray matter being folded and folded and folded as you receive all these sense perceptions. But you don't actually encounter the objectivity. You just encounter the ideas that are
But
folded within that
I would
gray
suggest
matter.
that the ones that are closer to the
Yes.
shape of objective reality are the ones that help us survive.
Well,
And that's the
they
goal
do
of
not.
education.
Yes, so those two things do not contradict. You're absolutely right, and I think that's the through line through all of this. I think that's what gets us to somewhere. I think what I just said is like there's this issue we have, and you said, well, there is a pole that we can all walk towards. There is a solar light from which we can all see from this poor predicament that all of us are in. And I think both are correct. I think, well, insofar as you layer in that goal that I want to find objective reality, then yeah, you can. Like, I think now we have a chess game that we can solve. We now have a solvable situation. At the very least, we can compare multiple solutions and find which ones are superior to others and move on and get better at it. But I do still think it's necessarily true that you'll never be able to actually behold Trevor, for example, or behold Bray, or even behold a concept like an electron, or like what underlies the concept of an electron. You'll only be able to behold the concept itself and further develop it as a like steel being folded over and over and over again to better encounter what is. But at the end of the day, that is the best you can do, and that's all you can do, and all you will ever be able to do. There's no way out of it. There's no way an AI can do otherwise either.
Perfect. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Because I was just sitting here. Sorry,
Right.
I didn't mean to jump out of my seat right there, but I was waiting, and I was gonna be like, all right, I know, Trevor, that you have to go here and really soon. So I just wanted to do one little like flash round before we close out, and I have it literally right here on my paper, and I wanted to talk about, with everything we've said, we've been really talking about the development of education through the past and things like that. So now I just want to take this last little bit of time that we have to talk briefly about where we are now and the very near future. Because when I was in school, not even, and I'm talking about the whole span of my schooling, I didn't have a cell phone until I got to middle school, and it was a dumb phone. And I didn't really even have a smartphone until I got to high school.
Me too.
And in high school, of course, you weren't even allowed to have a phone. If you were seen with a phone, at least here, it was taken from you and stuff. And
Go
phones could
directly
only
to
do so
jail.
much. It was only until I got to college that there were apps on your phone that you could,
Yes, I'm younger than y'all. I had the full phone experience in high school. That's what I had. You go around with your apps and stuff freshman year and onward.
Yeah, but it wasn't until I got to college that you could get an app that could, like, you could put in a math equation and it would solve it for you or something like that or whatever. But now there are children that are born and given an iPhone like
Day one.
immediately.
By the way, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Right,
No, I mean,
know.
like socially, like what a like I'm telling the audience this at this point, like one of the best important things that a child does as they grow up is they develop their socio-cultural norms and they learn how to communicate and build social relationships with others. I know you're like annoyed when your kid wants attention and you're working on something, but don't put him in front of an iPad. Like, you're going to destroy the insides of that kid. He needs to connect with humans. You can't just sit there coloring shapes or like playing that video game nonstop or looking at flashing videos over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's a waste of a kid. It's a waste of his soul. You turn him into nothingness, and he can't understand others, and you're going to destroy him or her. Don't do that.
In the same vein,
just be annoyed by the kid. Just talk to the kid. Help the kid develop a personality.
It's your kid. Do something.
Like, he's not going to develop a personality if you don't. Like, that's what my goading is. Like, if you want your kid to become a person and identify with people and understand who he is via the juxtaposition of who others are, be able to develop and surround and create a scaffolding from which he can encounter reality, do not give him an iPad. It's such a terrible idea. Like, it's a no-brainer.
I'll flip it on its head for you, Trevor, and say, how do you know that iPad babies will not become the true Ubermensch? The truth is, you don't know.
But look.
No, I don't. But at the same time, I have to say, what a horrible idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But go ahead.
But look, in that same vein, this was not available when I was in college. If it was in a very infantile state. But now a student can go to class, and any thinking, if rudimentary is the word I'm looking for,
any high order reasoning,
anything outside of, and I don't even really know the scope of it right now because I haven't done a deep dive, but I would guarantee a large majority of the work that they need to do now can be solved simply by talking to an artificial agent. Anything. They could have a paper written like that. I think all three of us have spent countless hours either in a library, at home, somewhere, typing, having to reason through things, looking through sources. You can do all of that in an instant now, like when the fucking microwave was invented. It's like suddenly you don't need to do all of this stuff. It's all there. Just pop it in there and it's done.
Yeah,
and now we have that.
There are arguments that we are, in fact, already you could consider us to be cyborgs. You could consider us to be partially artificial beings, because in a sense, I know right now, as you ask me, like the exact day that Martin Luther King was born, or insert this, that, or this. It just takes me a couple extra seconds to bring you that information. Like, you can kind of think of me plus this as one unit,
right?
But it's kind of all one thing.
Like, it's so weird that we're talking about this, of course. Because last night I'm with my, best friends in the world, right? Or some of them. Most of them, in fact. And so we're four people just sitting there talking about this stuff, right? And we're talking about the issues with AI and so on. And all these friends of mine are artists or writers, just like me. And we're all talking about how, devastating this AI bullshit is, and how lackluster it is, and how much anyone with an ounce of reasoning, has to hate it and so on. And I brought up the argument. I was like, people, we should unleash as of right now, unlimited or let's say unbounded power of AI against, say, human disease. We should be doing that. We are using AI in all the wrong places.
Yes.
I swear to God.
Well,
and we need to be using it and unleashing it against our worst problems.
You're absolutely
right. And it's like my friend Ashton said last night. I'm pretty sure he did not make this quote. I'm pretty sure he was quoting someone else. And I think even Bray has said it before, but it needs to be said again. We need AI to do the things we don't want to do. Right. Oh my goodness. Why are we training AI to do the things that we actually want to do? What's wrong with us?
To paint, to communicate.
So I think AI, I don't think, it is, in fact, doing exactly what you suggest. I think AI, like everything else, when you introduce it into the ecosystem, like what we have, like a drop of dye into a pitcher of water, I think it's going to touch
into the realm of ideas.
into the realm of ideas, beautiful. It affects quite literally everything. And it affects
Everything.
art. Like culturally speaking, the pop of it is like we immediately see that it's affecting our art, our music, our culture in that way, and our movies and our films. Like it does immediately affect that
And
way.
that's why I
But one
view
of
it
the
as
things that we don't
dangerous. It's so top down, like I said the last episode.
well, I would actually say it's bottom up, very much so bottom up, because it's affecting quite literally everything, and it's affecting everything in its ways as it grooves upwards like this, as people try to use it, and it forms things that are considered to be useful. So, as an example, I would give you the Nobel Prize that was recently given to these two guys who had used AI essentially to design proteins or to figure out the exact structure of enzymes, and they got the Nobel Prize for that. And that is a perfect example of what you want AI to do that you just that you proposed. I would put to you that AI is in fact doing exactly what we want to do, which is also doing exactly what you don't want it to do. It's doing all of these things.
For sure, but like at
It's
the
doing
same
all.
time, this country all but outlawed nuclear energy. Like
Yeah,
come on.
It was.
Like if we can do something so detrimental to our survival as
I would
outlawing
say that we shouldn't do either of those things. You know,
nuclear
like
energy.
you can have your cake and eat it too here. Like you can have like I think there's a world where we could have nuclear energy and also good AI. Like you don't like there's not a need for a
we need to have both.
yeah.
Like AI is here; it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and that Sputnik moment recently, people have been calling it with deep thought or deep mind or
Deep Seek or whatever.
Deep Seek, yeah, yeah, that's been an ongoing concern. I think it's being like outlawed in a couple countries and here and there.
I hope that these corporate mega overlords are I hope their timbers
Shaking in their
are
boots.
shivered.
Yeah,
Like seriously.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
with that being said, I want to let Trevor get on his way here, so we're gonna go ahead and do your.
That was a good episode.
I guess
it was.
Yeah, closing remarks. Anybody on the state of education?
I can do them.
As Tanner, I think, shared a thing in the politics channel about the bill for abolishing the Department of Education.
I'm afraid
That's
so.
Funny.
Like, and this is what I mean by like top down. What I'm trying to say really is that we live in a high chaos state, people, and you, the viewer, need to know that. The quicker you accept that, the better. There is no overarching reason as to why things are happening around you. And in other words, I'm trying to humanize your opponent. Let's say that you're a mega leftist, right? Like Bray. I happen to know that Bray understands to a deep level that these people are just people. And that is part of the problem. You know what I mean? Like it's not their peopleness that's the problem. It's just that they're just people, and just like you and me. And so, like, we right now, as Bray just eloquently pulled up or showed us, there's a part of this society that we live in right now in America that is trying to demonize educators. Like, how could you possibly do that? The people who like lay down and take it every day. I'm one of them. And how could you possibly say that? How could you possibly say that the people who are literally sacrificing their time, energy, and lives to educate your community's children are the bad guy? And so what if the goal of education is to survive? This is not how you do it. If the goal of education is to survive as an individual and a collective, this idea of demonizing your opponent is not how you do it. It's just not. And it's exactly how you don't take care of each other.
Right. It's contrary to our message almost every episode on here. And I'm glad that you said that. It's like if the goal is to survive as a collective, then there's a solution for that. If the goal is to survive as an individual and a collective, kind of like how I was saying, like have a first line of defense, but also be prepared to support yourself, there's a solution for that. But it feels a lot like, to me, in America today, that we only want to focus on the individual, and that's it. And I don't think that is acceptable for the human species.
In general,
that's
it's
all.
not. I mean, once again, I talk to my students about scientific truth. And the scientific truth is exactly what you just said. We cannot live without each other.
Mhm.
And last night, I'd like to share one more thing about last night. I was talking to my friends about how different, not of a person that I am, but of different ideas that roll around in my head. They've known me forever, and I've known them forever, and they know how evil, we all used to be. You know what I mean? And it's like through great effort, we've all overcome one thing or the other. And I was telling them it really is this way. And viewer, I hope you listen to me. That just a few things had to click together in my head, and then suddenly every other puzzle piece thereafter was like, okay, this literally fits together.
Mhm.
And what am I talking about? I'm talking about taking care of people, taking care of each other. I mean, for so long, like Bray is saying, you're told you need to, and you do need to take care of yourself first. Don't misunderstand me. Like, you need to look out for your well-being, but like oftentimes the best way to look out for your well-being is to help people and form a group. That's all there is to it. We're social species, and we can't escape.
Trevor, I know you're getting the call to arms over there.
Yes, I am. So I would really, and really quite shortly, just say that it is in fact all subjective. And that can't be escaped. And so what is the goal of education? Well, that is a great question, viewer. You're going to have to decide that for yourself and become who you are. Accept your contradictions and let your emotions drive you to action. You can intellectualize the issue, but at the end of the day, all you can do is your best and do what you can in service of your higher aspiration. What is it? Well, that's for you. I would probably end there and wish you both and the viewer a wonderful rest of your day.
Likewise.
I'll see you.